Hi friends, welcome to chapter 8, supporting your ideas. This chapter is going to be a continuation on the discussion we started in last chapter, chapter 7, which is researching topics, finding appropriate sources and references. And now we're going to be talking about how to use those references and sources to support your ideas. And so in this brief lecture, what I would like to share with you is the various types of supporting materials to support our ideas using extended examples, brief examples, and hypothetical examples. Explain how to use examples effectively in our speech, and then we'll briefly touch on how to use statistics. Specifically, we'll look at the mean, the median, the mode, and what those are and what they actually measure. So supporting materials, supporting our ideas, we could use examples, we could use statistics, and we could use testimonies. So let's look at the examples. What are examples? Essentially, examples are a specific case to illustrate an idea. And so if you reflect back at the beginning of the semester, I shared with you that introduction video, the 3 keys to success. Now, the 3 keys to success, which is, having purpose, developing grit, and living your dreams. Those are very broad, abstract ideas. And so I used my own personal life and my personal journey through education as an example to help you understand what is purpose, what is grit, and what is truly living out your dreams. And so there are types of examples we can use within our speeches. They could be brief examples. They could also be extended examples, or they could even be hypothetical examples. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the benefits and tips for using examples within our speeches. Well, one of the main benefits of using examples, it helps clarify ideas. It also reinforces our ideas. It can also personalize our ideas. So again, going back to that intro video, I shared with you those 3 keys to success. I gave my own example of my personal life to personalize, again, those broad abstract ideas. It helps make the speech vivid and textured. And then, of course, the biggest tip that I can offer you in using examples in your speech is really practice the delivery, practice delivery to enhance the overall presentation. Okay, so let's look at brief examples. What are brief examples? Well, it's a specific case referred to passing to illustrate a point. So they are very brief examples. So, for example, that video that I mentioned, the intro video. So they're just very brief. We don't spend too much time talking about the example. And if we're going to use brief examples, we should be careful to ensure that the audience will catch that reference or that example. So, using examples helps, again, clarify ideas. So I'm going to use an example of a speech of a speaker using examples, brief examples in her presentation, right? So let's go ahead and take a look.
Many of us are familiar with prominent Chicanos and Chicanas, such as actress Jessica Alba, boxer Oscar de la Hoya, and guitarist Carlos Santana. But you may be less familiar with other Americans of Mexican origin who have made important contributions to U.S. society. Nancy Lopez played a crucial role in popularizing women's professional golf and won 48 tour championships. Dr. Ellen Ochoa is a former astronaut who logged more than 480 hours in space and invented several optical methods that greatly aid space exploration. Dr. Mario Molina won the 1995 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his research on the formation and decomposition of the ozone layer.
Okay, so there we have an example of, at the beginning of the speaker's presentation, she used 3 or 4 examples, brief examples, where She mentioned predominant figures that people could probably recognize and to really illustrate her point. But she dived deeper in that presentation to really focus on one particular person. So
Many of us are familiar with.
this would be an example of a brief example. You could use a lot of those specific instances in passing to support a particular idea. Let's go ahead and look at extended examples. So extended examples are stories. They could be narratives in anecdote, developed at length to illustrate a point. And so they tend to be, again, an example, but more drawn out with more rich explanation. So let's go ahead and take a look at this example of using an extended example.
One friend called him the funniest person I've ever known. Other friends called him a military hero. Everyone said that what happened to him was tragic. Curtis Gearhart was a lovable guy who grew up in Iowa and went to Des Moines Lincoln High School. Eager to serve his country, he enlisted in the Army right after graduation and served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. But when he came home to Iowa, he knew things were different. He felt guilty that fellow soldiers were losing their lives overseas, and every day he suffered blinding, excruciating headaches. So he went to a nearby VA hospital for help. They told him he'd have to wait 5 to 6 weeks for treatment. The wait was too much. The headaches and heartaches were too much. So one Monday evening, Curtis took his own life. Tragically, he became one of the 20 American veterans who commit suicide every day.
So in this presentation, what we see is an extended example of someone's life building to that larger idea. And so that example personalizes the speaker's topic of, what she's going to be presenting about, maybe, veterans and mental health, right? And so this is, again, an example of an extended example. So consider using extended examples within your presentations to help provide texture, to provide more vivid accounts of your topic that you're going to be speaking about. So let's move on to hypothetical examples. These are examples describing fictitious situations to promote understanding, or we could use hypothetical examples to elicit some sort of emotional appeal. So we could say, imagine, right? Blah, 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 blah. Or imagine your feet are sinking in warm sand and the cold ocean is barely touching your toes, right? We could paint a picture for the audience. Now, obviously, hypothetical examples are fictitious, but they can promote understanding. So let's go ahead and take a look at this speech presentation.
Imagine you're at the farmer's market. In front of you are ripe, red tomatoes, sweet and juicy and full of flavor. And on your left are bushels of fresh, leafy greens, packed with vitamins and minerals. Now, imagine you're at the supermarket. In front of you are dull, mealy tomatoes that have been treated with pesticides. And to your left, there are wilted heads of iceberg lettuce that have little flavor and even less nutrition. These are the choices we face when we go shopping. It's a choice between buying locally grown, organic produce and heavily treated factory produce. It's also a choice of our health. According to the British Journal of Nutrition, organic produce has more vitamins and minerals and fewer pesticides than traditionally grown produce.
So once again, we see that hypothetical example. What was really interesting about this presentation is that the speaker is framing these examples. It's essentially framing the situation with 2 potential outcomes. You either buy the locally grown, organic, pesticide-free produce, or you go with that, factory-produced produce that's probably pumped with, pesticides and was genetically modified, that was growing in an unnatural environment. And so she's using that hypothetical situation of, imagine you're at the grocery store and you're faced with two options. Which option are you going to pick, right? And that's what she's going to probably try persuading us on. Yes, we got it. Okay, so statistical measures. When using statistics, these are different measurements of dispersion. So how data is dispersed over a natural bell curve, or how the data relates to each other. So observation. So when we talk about the mean, we're talking about the average value of the group of numbers. So typically when we talk about the average score, so let's say maybe at the end of the semester I say, okay, on average, everyone took the final exam and the average score was 80%, right? So how do we get the average? Well, we add up all the scores of 35 students and we get that total and we divide it by the number of students. That gives us the average score. So it's the average value. Now, the median is the middle figure in group once figures are ordered from highest to lowest. And so a lot of people get the mean and the median confused. Again, mean is the average. Median is just the center point of where the data is ordered from, highest to lowest or lowest to highest. Now the mode is the number of occurring most frequently in a group. So, let's say using that example of, students at the end of the final. So let's say, the mean would be 80%. That means I added up all the scores and divided that total by the number of students, and I got the average 80%. The median would be the middle figure in a group once figures are ordered from highest to lowest. And so what I would do to get the median is order the scores from lowest to highest. So let's say the lowest score was, let's say 48%. And then I would order from 48 all the way up to the highest. And let's say the highest score was, a 93, right? So we could take a look at the median. What would, between that range from 40, I think I said 43 to 93, what would be that middle number? How do we get that? And then the mode is the number occurring most frequently within a group. And so let's say that out of those scores, the most occurring number were students somewhere around these, the high 70s or 80s, right, to produce that mean score. And so this is all that these measurements of dispersion or statistical measures do. And so we have to be mindful, like you don't need to be, an expert in statistical analyses to understand this, but you should be able to clarify, are you speaking about the average? So on average, I use this example in class as sleep deprivation. So I read a study a few years ago that measured sleep deprivation on college campuses around the US. And they found on average, 70% of people on campus have sleep deprivation. And so, that explains why, students are falling asleep in class. People like me are not presenting coherent lectures. People are speeding around in the parking lot. And so sleep deprivation is a real issue on college campuses. And so that was the average. They took all those scores and got that average of 70%. Okay, so here's an example of a speaker using statistics within their presentation to support their ideas. Let's take a look.
According to the Urban Mobility Report from researchers at Texas A&M University, Americans collectively spend 4.2 billion hours stuck in traffic every year. All told, traffic congestion results in more than $87 billion worth of wasted fuel and lost productivity. Now that number breaks down to about $750 per traveler per year. Clearly, we are wasting far too much time and money on highway gridlock.
So there we see the speaker using averages to support their claim or their argument. We're spending too much time and money sitting in traffic. So they probably got the averages from different sites. Maybe it's the DMV or the maybe some sort of organization like AAA to get that statistics, and they use those averages to support their ideas. Okay, so let's move on to testimonies. Quotations or paraphrases used to support a point. So testimonies in the most common form of application looks like quotation marks, or quoting someone, or even paraphrasing some researcher or scholar. So testimonies from recognized experts, typically research scholars. So these are going to be the most common. So according to researchers at Stanford, they found this, this, and this. Or according to the dean of student affairs at MSJC or RCC, they found X, Y, and Z. So this is using testimony from an expert opinion. Now, keep in mind, you could actually use expert testimonies or peer testimonies, and these are individuals who have lived experiences. So, think of like how news reporters always find someone to interview, and maybe someone who was in the area or saw the whole event. They become essentially a peer testimony. A few years ago, one of my students, her dad was the fire chief in the local area, and she gave a presentation on fire prevention for our homes, like how to prevent fires from happening in your house. And so she interviewed her dad, who was the chief of police, and used that as one of her sources because she had access to an expert testimony. And so that was pretty cool to help that student with integrating some of those sources into her speech. So let's take a look at this speech using expert testimony.
Our drinking water comes primarily from the pipes that carry water into our homes, offices, schools, and workplaces. It's hard to say exactly how many lead pipes are out there. A 2016 article in the Detroit Free Press explains that most cities didn't track the use of lead pipes historically. However, a recent study by Joseph Berry, an economist at Northwestern University, shows that around 6 million homes receive water through lead pipes. Another 81 million homes receive water through pipes with lead soldering and fixtures, which can leach just as much lead into the water supply as the pipes themselves.
So there we go. That speaker is relying on expert testimonies such as researchers to back up some ideas or support the groundwork for maybe a persuasive speech or maybe even an informative speech. So here are some tips on using expert testimonies. Use quotes. You could paraphrase, but make sure that you're paraphrasing accurately and you aren't taking the person's words out of context. Use qualified sources, use unbiased sources, use identifiable sources. So when you are using supporting information in your speeches, a great thing to use are examples, testimonies, and what was the other thing that we just talked about? Oh yeah, statistics, right? So these are some things that you can use in your speech to support your ideas and lay the foundation for a very compelling speech. So that's it for this brief lecture. We'll see you next time.